Well, just minutes until congressional leaders arrive at the Libya hearings on Capitol Hill. Those hearings today on what went wrong in the Benghazi terror attack on 9/11. 4 Americans, including U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens, were murdered. California Congressman Ed Royce sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He chairs the House Terrorism Subcommittee, and I know you're going to be heading in there in just a moment, so thanks for taking a few minutes with us. The president offered almost no information yesterday in the news conference on Benghazi. He refused to say if he issued an immediate order to help those under attack. Are you disappointed that the president hasn't been more forthcoming?
Well, I think we're disappointed in several things. One, we had a team of 16 security personnel that were pulled out of the theater before the attack. That was very unfortunate. Second, the quick reaction force did not arrive in time to save our Americans, and every indication is that was a delayed response. The third point, of course, is that to try to spin this after the attack, an attack that occurred on 9/11, to try to argue that this was a protest against a video that spun out of control when we already had the evidence, and indeed an al-Qaeda affiliate was claiming credit for the attack on the very day of the attack, that seemed bizarre.
Well,
so yes, we have many questions.
Do you think the president of the White House is lying?
Well, I think the question is, why did it take 8 days of insisting and spinning this story that it was a spontaneous event?
What do you think the answer is?
Well, I think the answer is that the British, the United Nations, the Red Cross, all had ample evidence that they had come under attack, and so did our consulate. Our consulate had been under attack. All reached the conclusion that it was time to bring security in, and the administration did not do that. The administration did not put the security that had been requested in place.
Congressman, yesterday, and I'll quote the president, this is about the only thing he did say of substance, "My orders were to do whatever we need to do to make sure they're safe." Congressman, no help ever arrived. Does that mean that the president's orders were either ignored or refused?
Well, we need to get the answer to exactly that question, because in the first place, the contingency plans that should have been in place, the cancellation of the security team that was supposed to be there to defend in an attack like this, the lack of response by the quick reaction team in a timely fashion, the fact that you had a 6-hour firefight without forces coming to the aid of Americans there. And lastly, we now have lost that asset. We've lost that CIA unit that was there on the ground monitoring and trying to tell us about weapons systems that were moving through that area and al-Qaeda in that area.
Congressman,
so all of that has been lost.
Reportedly, there were a couple of drones there, one in particular that was providing real-time coverage of exactly what was happening, all the way, arguably, to the White House and the Situation Room. If it's true that the president was there, may have been watching, and yet delegated the task to the Pentagon, do you consider that to be inappropriate for a commander-in-chief when American citizens are under fire?
Well, I do think it's inappropriate, and I also think that the administration had in mind a certain scenario that they were pushing. The idea, as we saw on 5 separate appearances by our UN ambassador over the weekend, where the thesis was that this was after all a protest that had spun out of control. I think that they had bought into a storyline that didn't match the reality on the ground, and it was very hard for them as a consequence to adjust to the fact that it was an al-Qaeda attack. But occurring on 9/11, it should have been obvious to them, and it was certainly obvious to other consulates in the area that al-Qaeda was operating and indeed training not far from the Benghazi facility.
Congressman, what is the one thing you hope to learn today?
Well, what I would like to know is when the request was made for help, who in the chain of command denied that help to our ambassador and to our team there on the ground.
Do you have suspicions?
I do not know the answer to this. I want to find the answer to that.
There's a mountain of evidence that contradicts the story that was put out by the White House for up to 2 weeks, that this was all just a YouTube video and not a terrorist attack. What do you make of that?
I think this is the problem when you have a thesis as to why there's resentment against the United States around the world, and you advance that as the explanation, when in point of fact, what we really had on the ground was Al-Qaeda preparing for another 9/11 attack. And the unfortunate thing about this is that Al-Qaeda hits these targets over and over. We saw that on 9/11. And so we need to learn from this particular attack our inability to be prepared and to have a contingency plan to save these Americans. We don't want this replicated again. So the next time this occurs, we have to have the right frame of mind going in, and we have to give these security forces the go-ahead to come to the aid of Americans under attack.
Congressman Ed Royce, we will let you proceed behind you into the hearing room, and thank you so much for taking a few moments.
Thank you.